morning, lovelies. Nobody likes perfect characters, and it's easy to see why. We're not perfect. To err is to be human, and we want to see that reflected in our media. But it can be tough writing character flaws, especially in our main characters. How much is too much? What is the right flaw that will be compelling without being annoying? So today I'm asking you technically 5 questions to help you best figure out the best flaw for your characters. Question number 1, what is your character's greatest strength? This can also be their flaw. Most flaws are totally fine, even encouraged, until they go too far. If a character pulls strength from, say, their religious faith, then they could very easily turn that into zealotry. If a character is very stubborn, then this will help push them through difficulties, but also make them deaf to constructive criticism. This was one of Zuko's biggest problems, as he was an absolute nightmare of a villain for Team Avatar for 2.5 seasons, but then he joined them and became one of their best allies. His single-minded focus chased them around the world without any regard as to whether or not he should be doing this, but then it also got him to join them and end the war. Ambition is a very classic example here. Ambition in and of itself is fine. It just means wanting more for yourself and setting high goals. But in the wrong circumstances, this can be a problem. If your story revolves around a mountain climber, for instance, their ambition is probably to climb the highest and most difficult mountains, probably even becoming famous for it. Like, this could be their career path. This, in and of itself, is fine. In fact, it works as a brilliant character motivation and driving force, and can even lead a whole team of characters through their darkest hour. But let's say that this mountain climber has a rival who also wants to be the best mountain climber. Our main character, in addition to ambition, may also have enough desperation or entitlement or a sheer lack of morals, and that pushes them to actually try to kill their rival. And now you've got both an excellent flaw and a really cool narrative of conflict. The ambition of the mountain climber can be a flaw without going straight into murder territories, as people who let themselves be blinded by ambition, or any goal really, can end up sacrificing several vital things like relationships, their families, their happiness, and every other facet of their lives and personality. Check out your character's strengths, and then figure out which one could be an interesting flaw under the right circumstances. But let's say you haven't figured out your character's strength yet, in which case, how does your character's backstory contribute to their flaw? Characters, or I should say people, don't spring up from the earth fully formed. They're from somewhere. They have years of life experience that have led them to page 1 of your novel. I mean, unless you're writing a book or a fantasy world where people do just spring from the earth fully formed. In which case, you can look at both Ultron and Vision as potential flaws and strengths in that type of character. But anyway, flaws are very similar. They often come from somewhere. Think about what your character has done in the past that has caused them problems and that they feel guilty about, regardless of whether they deserve that guilt or not. I'm using guilt here because it is one of the most potent emotions out there. And while it can drive people forward, it can also pull them back, which causes a really great narrative conflict if, their guilt is pulling them back, but the plot or motivation or whatever else they have going is trying to push them forward. So the characters are caught in this tug of war, and that's what your story is about. Guilt for our past actions also generally means that we have done something wrong, and the cause of that wrongness is usually our flaw. Recycling the Avatar: Last Airbender example, Aang has always preferred to run from his problems and take a carefree attitude toward life, which clashes spectacularly with his duties as the Avatar. When the world needed him most, he ran away. Personally, I think he would not have survived if he had stuck around and would have died at the age of 12 during the Air Nomad genocide, but that's not the point. The point is that Aang ran away. Aang did not face his problems, he ran from them. And he continues to try to run from his problems, namely his status as the Avatar, for the whole show with varying levels of success until he not only faces them head on, but also manages to seamlessly fold his Avatar duties into his pacifist Air Nomad philosophy. And that manifests in him finding a bloodless way to defeat Fire Lord Ozai. If your character's backstory involves any sort of trauma, think about how exactly that's going to pull them back. What flaw is this going to manifest as that they have to overcome, or that they succumb to? Question number 3, what about your plot? At some point in the story, you probably want your characters to have their lowest point or darkest hour. This is where everything seems hopeless, and even the audience is wondering, how exactly are you guys gonna pull this off? These are even more impactful when such a situation is caused by the character's own actions, their flaw. In Wreck-It Ralph, Ralph's biggest flaw is his desire to be seen as a hero. This flaw is understandable, seeing as he's been playing the villain in his game for over 20 years and is completely unappreciated by his community. But this flaw causes him to jeopardize the lives, homes, and happiness of everyone around him as he recklessly goes about searching for that recognition. This leads to the lowest point, where Ralph's game is about to be unplugged, the community whose approval he sought has completely abandoned him, and he has crushed the hopes and dreams of his only real friend, Vanellope. Meanwhile, Felix and the other characters in Ralph's game are overcoming their own flaws and realizing that, you know what, we probably should not be dicks to Ralph. So when Ralph gets over himself and sets about fixing everything, accepting the fact that he's never gonna be publicly lauded as a hero, he still gets the smaller but more meaningful community in his new friends. This obviously works best if you are writing a character-driven story rather than a plot or theme-driven, although you can absolutely make this work too. If you don't want your character's flaw to be central to the story, but you still want them to have a flaw, then ask yourself this. When you consider your plot and all of the challenges that your character is going to have to overcome, what is the one trait that can make this even more challenging? So for instance, if you have a character who spends at least one scene in your book pretending to be a servant and they have to scrape and bow to really crummy people, pride would be a really bad flaw to have. Well, bad for them, great for you as the writer. They would have to confront and overcome their pride, or fail to overcome it and be found out. In Citadel, my sci-fi novel that comes out next year, the main character Olivia sets out to start a dialogue with the alien creatures that her town has been fighting with for centuries, and she very quickly realizes that they need to stop the cycle of violence and make peace. It's one of the big themes of the book. But it's made far more difficult by the fact that her biggest flaw is wrath. She has anger management issues on account of the whole being oppressed her entire life, she saw her mom die, she lost her boyfriend in this war, etc. She learns that one of her new alien friends is directly responsible for the death of her boyfriend, and when she lashes out in anger, her flaw, that burns a lot of bridges that she spent the entire book building, and she has to work really hard to regain the alien's trust. It doesn't drive as much of the plot as Wreck-It Ralph, but it still causes a lot of problems for her. And that's why I chose that flaw specifically rather than something like greed or vanity. Character flaws are really only flaws when the story brings it out. A person whose biggest flaw is vanity can go their whole lives without this causing much issue. And flaws don't necessarily have to be fatal. They can be confronted and changed. Or not. Which leads us to our next question. Number 4, overcome the flaw or succumb to it? Let's talk tragedies. The whole point of tragedies, from Oedipus Rex to Shakespeare to Death of a Salesman, is exploring the consequences of a person's flaw. Again, it really only works if the characters are in a story that exploits such a flaw. It's been pointed out, hilariously I might add, that if Shakespeare's main characters swapped stories, there wouldn't be any tragedy. Othello and Hamlet are the most obvious examples. Othello's decisive wrath is what allows Iago to so easily manipulate him into killing his wife, Desdemona, while Hamlet's anxious hesitation over avenging his father is why so many people died in his tragedy. If Iago tried to manipulate Hamlet into killing his wife by lying about her having an affair, Hamlet would do what he does. He would get anxious, he would hesitate, and he would investigate, and then probably realize that she's innocent. Meanwhile, if Othello's dad showed up as a ghost and ordered him on a vengeance quest, the deed would be done in like 5 minutes, max. Plus or minus some travel time. It is because these characters are written in situations that exploit their specific flaw that they're tragedies. Obviously, if you're not writing a tragedy, then you probably should not have your main character ultimately succumb to their flaw. I mean, you can make it work. Lord of the Rings, Frodo technically did that in the climax, but that's usually not what we're there to see. However, you can absolutely make a side character story way more tragic by having them succumb to their flaw. This is usually a villain, but it can also be one of the hero's allies. Azula succumbed to her flaw of perfectionism and the need for total control by spiraling into a mental breakdown. Catra, for the first 4 seasons of She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, succumbed to her dual flaws of not taking personal responsibility for her actions and self-loathing, chasing everyone away until there was no one left. She got over it in season 5, a little too quickly for my tastes, but she very willingly went down that rabbit hole, and it looked like she was gonna stay there for a while. Pretty much every human antagonist in the Jurassic Park franchise, the Alien franchise, and several other monster movies are brought down not just by the monsters, but by their own flaw of greed. If their flaw had not been greed, they probably wouldn't have been eaten. Basically, when it comes to figuring out character flaws, you need to figure out where did it come from, how does it relate to their strengths, do you want them to overcome it, and what does the rest of your plot and story demand. If you want more writing advice videos, check out this playlist right here. I do offer professional manuscript critiques, so if you want me to look over your work in progress, my website is linked in the description of this video. I will see you next time. Bye, lovelies!